listening to the Heartland Author Podcast. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For today's episode, I had the opportunity to interview Troy Hadeed. Troy's first book, which has the working title Popcorn in My Pocket, is soon to be published. In addition to his writing work, Troy is a yoga practitioner and instructor. I'm here with Troy Hadeed. Did I pronounce your last name correctly?
Yes, you did. You did. Perfect.
Who is the author of an upcoming book with the working title of Popcorn in My Pocket. Troy, welcome to the Heartland Author Podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. And should I call you Aaron or Aaron?
Aaron.
Aaron. You know, in Trinidad we have so many different pronunciations for words, and because of our dialect, you never really know. But yes, I am, and I'm really excited for this book to come out at the end of the year, and it is my first book, and it's been quite a journey, you know.
Okay, I'm going to ask the first two questions I have on my list of questions in reverse order. What is it like to live on the island of Trinidad, which is part of the country of Trinidad and Tobago?
Yeah, it is, you know, it's a very special and magical place, without any doubt whatsoever. But someone once described Trinidad to me as, in permaculture, I believe there's this place they call the edge. And that's where two ecosystems collide. So like where a swamp would meet the shore, or where a sea meets the shore, or marshlands meet ocean, I don't know. But that's kind of like what Trinidad is. There's so much beauty and majesty, but because so many cultures collide here, it's very raw and it's very edgy. It's not your typical island paradise vacation kind of place. It's a very raw cultural island, very industrial as well, but still a lot of raw nature and natural majesty to offer, you know.
And feel free to further introduce yourself to our listeners.
Yeah, so I was born in Trinidad. I've lived there my whole life. And, you know, my dad's heritage is Middle Eastern, from Syria. And my mom's heritage is from Ireland. And they were both born here, and I've lived there my whole life with two brothers. Since I was young, really young, about 20s, I knew I would write a book one day, you know, and that journey has took me through owning a hemp store, running a recycling business, now teaching, practicing, and sharing yoga and meditation internationally for over 15 years. And now it's brought me to writing this book that has all my heart and soul in it.
Now, without spoiling too much of your upcoming book, what is your book with the working title of Popcorn in My Pocket going to be about?
Yeah, so it's, you know, a funny story to that is I was in my early 20s when I was with my girlfriend at the time, and we used to go to movies a lot. And I put my hand in my pocket and I discovered old popcorn from like a week before. And I remember so clearly putting it in my mouth, and I uttered the words, "Popcorn in My Pocket is going to be the name of my first book." Now, whether it actually will be or not, that's in question, because I am being pushed towards a title change. But I've always wondered, what the hell would a book like that be about? And it never really was clear to me until I started writing it 4 years ago. And it all became really clear. So in this book, the analogy is that popcorn relates to all these spiritual insights and teachings and philosophies that we throw around in the world. And there's popcorn everywhere. And everyone's reposting it and reading it and talking about it. But there's just a pocket, and everyone has their own spiritual pocket. And all of these teachings only become real knowledge when we can ask a question, how does this apply to my life? And what does it mean to me in my life? And then when we have the courage to apply them and embody them, or try to, that's when we then come to understand what these teachings really represent. But they have to come out of our own experience, our own introspection. It's not just as easy as re-quoting or resharing or reading and talking about all of these teachings and philosophies. So in this book, I share some of these teachings and insights and reflections, and I also share stories as to how they apply to my life. Not only where I may have embodied them, but more importantly, where I failed to embody them. And I use that as an example to then spin it back on the readers and ask you, reader, then to see how these teachings might apply to their lives. And the end result to me is we all take these teachings and see how they apply to our lives rather than just throwing them around. And the end result is that hopefully a reader is a better human being at the end of it all.
Now, that's a very good explanation of the working title of your book, Popcorn in My Pocket, you gave. And I hadn't honestly thought, being from the American Midwest, of popcorn being kind of a cultural reference, because here in the American heartland we tend to think of popcorn as snack food.
Yeah. Well, it's my favorite snack food, personally. So it's just a little twist on it, and it makes it. There are a lot of people that would not necessarily gravitate towards spiritual insights, teachings, or reflections. But because the book is somewhat delivered in a very digestible, palatable way, it makes it a lot more accessible to readers who might not pick up a book that says, change your life through spiritual teachings, for instance. So in a lot of ways it makes the human experience more accessible. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
And now, will Popcorn in My Pocket, or whatever title it were to have in actuality once published, be self-published or traditionally published?
I have currently decided on self-publish. It's been quite a journey, as I'm now discovering that almost all first-time authors have to navigate, but I have decided to self-publish.
Now, a couple months ago, when I originally wrote down these questions for this interview, on your webpage at that time, you quoted yourself as saying, in part, "My priority is not writing for the entertainment of readers. For me personally, that would be an inauthentic use of my energy and time." Yeah. What motivates you to write?
I write, and I say that, and I read that now, and of course the journey of writing and learning to write and working with a literary team has made me a better writer. So I hear those words now, and I can definitely see how they could be better. But to answer your question, for me, my intention to write is to move people. It's to inspire people. It's to make people's lives better and have us really look at our lives to see how we can be better human beings and how we could create a better world. I understand there are people that are just passionate about writing. They are full-on writers that whether somebody would read their work or not, they would still write. Because writing for them is an art form. I don't know if you can relate to this. It's a form of expression. For me, I don't currently see writing as that for me. While I have learned so much about myself and my own views in the writing of this book, I have grown so much. I don't think I would necessarily take 4 years out of my life to write if I didn't think that this book would actually be read. So I think what drives me is the possibility of helping people consciously grow and evolve.
Now, tell us more about your journey as a yoga practitioner, and what does yoga mean to you?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question as well, because we have this concept of what we think yoga looks like. And a lot of the time we think of yoga and we think of these postures, or some of us even breathing practices, or this tradition. So in that aspect, if somebody were to ask me, when did you start practicing yoga? I would have to say at 25 years old is when I started a regular, consistent practice of postures and yoga in that sense. But I have come to understand yoga as so much more than these practices, right? At the foundation of yoga, if someone looks at the root of yoga, yoga is a realization of our union. It's to live in a space in which we can see divinity and see God in all living things and in everyone around us. So the practice of yoga, at its very root, has a lot more to do with how we live our lives than doing postures. And one of the greatest yoga practitioners to me was a man called Jesus. And I relate to him outside of organized religion, but the teachings of this man and what he is said to have embodied is the ultimate teachings of yoga. And I was influenced by him from a really young age. And now that I understand the intricacies of what it is to live yoga, I understand that he was probably actually my first yoga teacher. Indirectly, of course, someone who I say. But I think the practice of yoga is really about how do we embody this ultimate love, compassion, and understanding in our lives while being courageous and fierce enough to push boundaries and challenge what our society considers normal, but to do so in a compassionate way.
Now, what do you believe is one of the biggest issues plaguing humanity today?
I would have to say what I call the identity crisis. And my editor recently challenged a line in my book where I mentioned that every individual in the world has to overcome and is challenged by this identity crisis. And she questioned whether it was really every individual. And I had to say, generally, yes, because the identity crisis is part of the human experience. The mere fact that we are born into a physical body, and we are told from the time we are born, we are given a name and we're told that this is who we are. I am Troy, this is my body. The second that happens, I'm told the narrative that I am separate, that we are separate, that we are other, that we are these individual identities, these individual beings, rather than the narrative that we are, sure, we may have an individual experience, but we are actually all part of a whole. And I think the identity crisis is that we are individuals. Because if you think about it, if I believe the narrative, or I'm even unconsciously programmed by the narrative that I am Troy and this is my body, then what that means is that when my body ceases to exist, so will I. And that's not really a narrative that I connect to. I believe that we exist far beyond our bodies, that the resonance and vibration of our choices and how we live our lives and our relationships, that begins to shift the consciousness of humanity. That lives forever. That never dies. And I think that as long as I am consumed by my identity in physical form, then naturally I am going to do everything I can to preserve my own individual physical form and all the aspects of my individual identity, even if that has a negative impact on the people around me. So I think at the root cause of everything that's misaligned in our world is this belief or this narrative that we are separate individuals. And if we can begin to address that narrative and loosen its grasp on us, then we will learn to live and navigate the human experience with a lot more empathy, compassion, and love.
Troy, you are a wonderful guest for this podcast, and I thank you for appearing on the Heartland Author Podcast.
Thank you. It's really an honor. And I know your book's not out yet, so I'm not even sure if I could technically be called an author. But thank you for having me. It is an honor.
Troy was a wonderful guest to interview, and I wish him success with his upcoming book. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to write your imagination. Bye for now. You can learn more about me and my book writing projects at campaaronapollo.wixsite.com/authoraac. You can follow me on Twitter and Facebook at AuthorAAC and on Instagram at AACScribe. Copyright 2023, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this podcast episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.